Completing the square will solve any quadratic. You can take the method of completing the square, perform it on the equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and turn it into a formula that condenses all the steps into one formula. So it's kind of handy, especially if your equation isn't set up for completing the square nicely. One vocabulary note, the value underneath your radical, b squared minus 4ac, is what's called the discriminant of your quadratic. Before we work on actually solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, let's simplify some output that we might get if we plugged something in. So break down your radical first if you're simplifying something that you get out of the quadratic formula. So my square root 60, I can break down into 2 square root 15. And then if you look at it, negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root 15 all over 4, those terms are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to reduce this by dividing out a common factor of 2 and get negative 1 plus or minus 1 square root 15 all over 2. You don't have to write the 1 next to the square root 15 if you do not want to. Also notice that 2 square root 15 is a single term, and we divided by 2 by dividing 2 by 2. So it's still square root of 15. Looking at another one. So again, you want to break down your radical first. If you think about factoring 14, it's just 7 and 2, so you won't be able to bring any factors out except square root of negative 1 equals I. Now if you look at our expression that we got, you can't divide 1 by 2, therefore it's as simplified as it's going to go. And the 14's inside the radical, not outside, so I can't divide it by 2 either. Unless that coefficient out in front of your radical shares a common factor with everything else, you are done. So let's use this quadratic formula to solve some equations. You do need to have it memorized. There is a song that goes with it, which I will sing for you. Apologies in advance, but it's to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. So how it goes is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Beautiful. So a is your coefficient on your squared term, b is your coefficient on your variable to the first power, and c is your constant. So we're going to go ahead and replace those values in our quadratic formula. So b is negative 6. Make sure you plug things in their own set of parentheses. A is 1 and C is 10, and then A is 1 in the denominator as well. All right, now it's just simplifying. I'm going to make that opposite of negative 6 a positive 6, and then work inside your radical first. So that'd be 36 minus 40, which if you actually subtract gives you negative 4. And then the square root of 4 is 2, but it's negative, so we'll have 2i. You have a common factor of all 3 of those terms, so you can divide out a common factor of 2 and get 3 plus or minus 1i all over 1, or just 3 plus or minus I. So that's the solution to that one. Let's do another. So our quadratic formula solves a quadratic that's set up so that it has 0 on one side of our equation. So I'm going to subtract my 17x and add 25 so that I have 0 on one side here before I use the quadratic formula. Kind of like when you factor, you want to have 0 on one side, same idea. And now identify your values for a, b, and c. A is 16, b is negative 40, C is 25. Be careful with your negatives there. If you have a minus, make sure you include it on your value for A, B, or C. Then I have my values plugged into my quadratic formula. I would sing it again for you, but I won't torture you. Simplify what's inside of your radical first. So negative 40 squared, 40 times 40 is 1,600. And then if you multiply 4 times 16 times 25 together, that's also 1,600. All over 2 times 16 is 32. Well, inside my radical, that's just going to give me 0. And then the square root of 0 is just 0. So I have 40 plus or minus 0 over 32. Well, adding and subtracting 0, it's not going to give you 2 different values. Either way, you're just going to end up with 40 over 32. So we'll have a single value for our solution. We should reduce that. So I'm just going to divide by 2 a couple times here. And we'll end up with 5/4. So again, we need 0 on one side first. And then kind of the trick to this one is being really careful that you get your values for a, b, and c correct. A is your coefficient on your squared term, so it's 1, even though that one's written in the middle. B is -5, my coefficient on my x to the first term, and c is my plain old number. If it helps, go ahead and reorder it so that it's in order from highest to lowest degree. That way you won't confuse yourself when you try and plug those values in. So when I do plug those values in, we've had a lot of negative values for b, but it's not always negative. We'll end up with +5 plus or minus the square root of 25, and then like minus, and that'll be -24. We'll make that +24. Be super careful with your signs. We'll have 49 if you add those together. Square root of 49 is just 7, so we'll have to go ahead and do, since we can add 5 plus 7 over 2 and combine it, since those are both real numbers. You'll have 12/2 is 6, and then that'll give you -2/2 is -1. So x equals -1 and 6.